At The Rebel, we ask a lot of questions that, well, nobody else will. This time we asked the federal government for any documents that they had in relation to Alberta's climate leadership plan. You know, Rachel Notley's job-killing carbon tax on everything. We wanted to know if the federal government had any inkling in advance of just how bad Notley's carbon tax would be for us here in Alberta, because that would mean the federal government would know that Trudeau's carbon tax laid over top of Notley's carbon tax would be, well, that much worse. And our hunch was right. But honestly, we found out a lot more about Saskatchewan than we did about Alberta. And we found out a lot about how the federal government isn't really planning for the future. Let me show you this. On page 33 of this big, huge stack of documents is a briefing note prepared by the Department of Western Economic Diversification about the regional impacts of the carbon tax on Saskatchewan. The briefing note is dated February 2016, and when talking about the impacts of a federally imposed carbon tax, it reads, as a result, the province may face greater economic impacts as a result of a carbon price than other jurisdictions. Continuing on, it reads, as a result of this relatively high level of exposure to competitiveness pressures, carbon pricing may impose higher costs in Saskatchewan and Alberta than other Canadian jurisdictions. So as early as February 2016, the federal department charged with making sure that Western Canada's economy is still growing is telling the federal government that a carbon tax would hurt Saskatchewan and Alberta more than any other province. But there is more. In this briefing note, the bureaucrats are warning about international firms and billions of dollars in capital leaving Alberta and Saskatchewan. Look at this. A key concern for policymakers is that for carbon-intensive and highly trade-exposed sectors, production will shift to jurisdictions with less stringent carbon policies as a result of the carbon price in a given jurisdiction. They call this emissions leakage. This leakage can result in a loss of economic activity in the jurisdiction imposing the carbon price without any net reduction in overall emissions as production is increased in other jurisdictions. Did you get that? It's wordy. The bureaucrats are saying that the carbon tax won't actually lower emissions because companies will just up and leave and do business in places where there are no carbon taxes because it's cheaper and there are fewer regulations. Oh, but don't worry, because one page later, the bureaucrats have found their solution to this problem of emissions leakage or businesses leaving. It's actually sort of funny. Okay, remember, this is from February 2016, well before the November elections in the United States. The briefing note reads, further, it is likely that regulatory changes in other markets, such as carbon prices or other regulations on emissions, will reduce competitiveness pressures felt by Canadian firms over time. You have to read a little bit between the lines here. The bureaucrats' solution to the fact they knew they were going to instantly render the Canadian oil industry uncompetitive through increased taxes and costs was to just cross their fingers and hope that Hillary Clinton got elected and imposed a carbon tax of her own. Well, looks like that little plan didn't pan out the way they thought it would. Hillary Clinton lost. Donald Trump won. Trump is not imposing any carbon taxes. So to recap, the federal government knew that a carbon tax would hurt Alberta and Saskatchewan disproportionately. The federal government also knew that their carbon tax wouldn't reduce emissions. It would just force businesses to leave to do business where there are no carbon taxes. And the federal government thought that everything would be fine if Hillary Clinton won. Their whole plan for the Canadian economy hinged on Hillary Clinton winning the election. But she was terrible, just like carbon taxes, and she didn't win. But the federal government is proceeding with their plan to carbon tax us anyway, knowing full well the damage it will do. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid. At The Rebel, we ask the questions the other media outlets just refuse to. If you believe in our journalistic mission, you can help us. Go to theycan'tstopus.com.